Same speech that I just played a clip from, that same rally where he goes back to the hydroxychloroquine nonsense. That was about 8 weeks ago. This is from that same speech.
Worse than Afghanistan. How about that? Worse than Afghanistan, where, by the way, I started the process. All the troops are coming back home. They couldn't stop the process. 21 years is enough, don't we think? 21 years. They couldn't stop the process. They wanted to, but it was very tough to stop the process when by a government that wouldn't last. The only way they last is if we're there. What are we going to say? We'll stay for another 21 years, then we'll stay for another 50. The whole thing is ridiculous. So we're bringing our troops back home from Iraq. We're bringing the troops back home from Afghanistan.
I started the process, all the troops coming back home. They couldn't stop the process once I started it. It was very tough to stop the process. And then he says the government there won't last. The only way they last is if we're there. It's ridiculous. So I started the process. They couldn't stop it to bring all the troops home.
So yeah, from the mouth of the fucking horse that fucking rode into town and beat everybody up, whatever it fucking did, shit in the fucking street and fucked off back out of town. Yeah. So there's Donald Trump telling you from his own fucking lips, mate. I set it up and bring the troops home. And I set it up in such a way that it can't be stopped. And then I fucked off out of town and left all that shit behind for other people to deal with. Yeah. So, fuck you, Biden. You've got to resign. Look at the mess you've made of fucking Afghanistan. 7 months and look at the mess you've made. But actually, he was spending 4 years fucking it up. Absolutely fucking it up. Anyway, let's continue with this charade.
The audience applauds. That was 8 weeks ago. And you know, whether or not you think it is a good idea or a bad idea to have brought home U.S. troops from the war in Afghanistan, here's the former president bragging about how he's the one who set that in motion. And he set it in motion in a way that could not be stopped. Even though he said the Afghan government would definitely fall as soon as our troops left. He's bragging about that, right? He's getting applause for that from his supporters. And now it's actually less than 8 weeks since he said that. U.S. troops, in fact, did leave, and the Afghan government did, in fact, immediately fall. And now he's leading his supporters in, unbridled, chest-pounding outrage that President Biden must resign, that it's so terrible that U.S. troops left and that the Afghan government fell. Again, whether or not you are for or against U.S. troops leaving Afghanistan, you can't be for it. You can't take credit for doing it and for doing it in such a way that your successor could not reverse. You can't say you were for it, take credit for doing it, say that you made it so that nobody else had any choice, and then also be against it when it happens. Can you? I don't know. It seems like these days anything is possible. Take, for example, Republican Congressman Bill Posey of Florida. Here's a statement his office put out this week, Tuesday of this week. Quote, recent events in Afghanistan underscore the need for a proper plan when conducting military operations. Every effort should have been made to...
Every effort should have been made to evacuate Americans and our allies and military equipment before pulling out. Well, Donald Trump was the one who set in motion the withdrawal from Afghanistan. He's the one who signed a peace agreement with the Taliban. He's the one that ensured that when the Taliban started attacking cities in Afghanistan, that nobody went to the aid of those cities to fight the Taliban off. Not even the local army that they had spent 20 years and $2.2 trillion supporting and building and training. Nobody went to the aid of these cities as the Taliban came in over the last few months. But yes, every effort should have been made to evacuate Americans. Our allies, that is, the people who have worked with you as interpreters, truck drivers, security guards in your embassies and stuff like that, secretaries, their families, they're your allies. You should have made timely plans to evacuate them with your troops so that they don't get left behind to be murdered by the Taliban. And the military equipment that you gave to the army, well, can you just take it back? I don't know. 20 years of arming these people, showing them how to use it, and then expecting that when you leave, they're just going to run away and leave it, and the Taliban will take it over. So do you go in and bomb it? No. Blow it up? Take out the most important parts so it can never work again? No. Remove the engines, say, and just leave shells behind. Just remove the electronics, do it and strip them down. Leave a shell. Can't take it all, but you can take enough important parts that they can't move. Blow up your munition dumps and stuff like that. Yes, that's possibly something that you could have been doing over the last year or two. I mean, remember, Trump only went out of office January 20th this year. The last 2 years when he's been, in power, he could have been doing this. He could have been drawing down the troops and destroying this equipment and blowing it up, removing stuff, bringing it home. But he left it. He didn't do a goddamn thing. Left it to Joe Biden. And then this cunt, Bill Posey. Every effort should have been made to evacuate Americans, our allies, and military equipment before pulling out. So let's see what happens when he's got the opportunity to do that, or at least help in that process.
To evacuate Americans, our allies, and military equipment before pulling out. Okay, fair enough. Every effort should have been made to evacuate our allies, Congressman Posey. Every effort? Every effort? 3 weeks before he put out that statement, Congressman Bill Posey of Florida was confronted with an actual thing he could do on this actual subject. Not theoretical, but what some might call making an actual plan related to military operations. 22nd of July, House of Representatives voted on whether or not to expedite the processing of special immigrant visas for our Afghan allies, for Afghan interpreters and contractors and security personnel who worked with U.S. forces in Afghanistan. He says this week, every effort should have been made to evacuate our allies. Literally 3 weeks, three weeks before that, he got the opportunity to vote, to make more of an effort to evacuate our allies, and he voted no on that. He voted no on doing more to evacuate our Afghan allies, and now he says he's outraged that more wasn't done. Can you do that? Can President Trump both take credit for withdrawing U.S. troops from Afghanistan, for setting it in motion in a way that could not be reversed, and also be against the fact that it happened? Can a congressman like Bill Posey in Florida be outraged that more was not done to make sure our Afghan allies were evacuated right after he voted against doing more to make sure we would evacuate our Afghan allies? Can you? Can you do that? I have to tell you, amazingly today,
So I was just looking for the bit I wanted.
Why are Afghan allies, as valued and high priority as they are to us, why Afghans who had this special visa category created for them because they worked with U.S. troops, they worked with the U.S. government, they worked as part of the security mission in Afghanistan, they helped our forces there. Why can't they get their visa applications processed? Why is that process so broken and under-resourced? Why does it take so long? Here's Olivia Troy earlier today. Quote, I met with numerous external organizations during my White House tenure who advocated for refugees and pleaded for help in getting U.S. allies through the process. I got the phone calls and letters as the Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to Vice President Mike Pence. She said, quote, the system wouldn't budge, regardless of how much this was argued about in National Security Council meetings. The Pentagon weighed in, saying we needed to get these allies through the process. Mattis and others sent memos. Now, That's checkable, actually, and we checked, and she is right about that. Here's Defense Secretary Jim Mattis's memo in September 2018 telling the administration, advising the administration as Secretary of Defense, do not limit the numbers of people you're going to let in. We need to protect and prioritize these Iraqis and Afghans who aligned with our diplomats and warfighters by providing essential mission support. Olivia Troy today saying, quote, Mattis and others sent memos. We all knew the urgency, but the resources had been depleted. Well, what does that mean? Why were the resources depleted? Well, she has the story. She was there. She says, quote, there were cabinet meetings about this during the Trump administration where Stephen Miller would peddle his racist hysteria about Iraq and Afghanistan. He and his enablers across government would undermine anyone who worked on solving the SIV issue, the special immigrant visa issue, by devastating the system at Homeland Security and state. She says, quote, I tracked this issue personally in my role during my White House tenure. We got nowhere on it because Trump and Stephen Miller had had watchdogs in place at the Justice Department and Homeland.
I've got to pause this because even Maddow is making a mistake here, right? The full fucking tweet is, I tracked this issue personally in my role during my White House tenure. Pence was fully aware of the problem. I don't know why Maddow didn't fucking read that out, but yeah, Pence was fully aware of the problem. We got nowhere on it because Trump S Millar, Stephen Miller, had watchdogs in place at the Department of Justice, Department of Home Security and State, and security agencies that made an already cumbersome SIV process even more challenging, right? Pence was fully aware of the problem. So I wonder what he's fucking going to say now that fucking Afghanistan is fucking going down the fucking tubes. Like every fucking knew it would. Anyway.
Homeland Security at state and security agencies that made the already cumbersome SIV process even more challenging. Quote, the fear of people across the Trump administration to counter these enablers was palpable. There were numerous behind-closed-door meetings strategizing about how to navigate this issue. She says, quote, Trump had 4 years while putting this plan in place to evacuate these Afghan allies who were the lifelines for many of us who spent time in Afghanistan. They'd been waiting a long time. The process slowed to a trickle for reviews, other priorities. Then it came to a halt. Now, to be clear, what Olivia Troy is saying here is that for the Afghans who helped U.S. troops and U.S. forces in Afghanistan, who are now getting so much attention, right, for all the right reasons, these are Afghan allies of our forces. They are supposed to be able to get visas to come here with their families in thanks for what they did for our country. A special visa category was created for them for just that purpose. She's saying, yes, that process of getting that visa was already cumbersome. But she's saying under the Trump administration, while they were making overt plans to end the war in Afghanistan and bring all U.S. troops home from Afghanistan, like Trump was bragging about, right? While Trump was bragging that, yes, certainly he'd bring home all the troops, and yes, certainly the Afghan government would collapse as soon as he did that, but he wanted all the troops out anyway, so that's what he was setting in motion in a way that couldn't be reversed by anyone. While they were setting all that in motion during the Trump administration, they were also simultaneously deliberately sabotaging the process. What did she say? She called it devastating the system at Homeland Security and the State Department on purpose, so that those visas for our Afghan allies would get stuck in the system forever, so those Afghan allies wouldn't be able to get out, as they were planning to take out all U.S. troops, whereupon they knew the Afghan government would collapse. They deliberately sabotaged the process to make sure those Afghan visas would not be processed in any timely manner. Elizabeth Newman was a senior Homeland Security official under Trump. She today publicly confirmed Olivia Troy's account of how this happened inside the Trump administration. The Trump administration at the highest levels deliberately
I can vouch for Olivia Troy's characterisation. We'll add that we have proof of what Trump would have done. He abandoned our allies in the no-notice decision to withdraw from Syria. Kurds, Iraqis, SIDs, P2s, NGOs were left scrambling and many died. The people that helped America and these countries were left to flounder with no avenue of escape, and a lot of them died, which is going to happen in Afghanistan as well. America. These people put their lives on the line to help you, and you're basically turning your back on them, and you're going to cheer for Trump. President Donald Trump would have gotten every single American temper and piece of equipment out of Afghanistan. Really, he would have. It seems like he was working specifically to leave all that shit behind. I think if he'd have won the presidency against Joe Biden, I think he would have pulled the troops out. And he would have just said, well, it's not our fault, we've been there long enough. He would have turned his back on these people. And what's happening now, to be honest with you, I don't think just Afghans would have died if Trump was in charge. I think Americans and other foreign nationals who were in Kabul would have died as well. I think he would just have got the troops out and left everybody else behind and went, fuck it, I've done my best. And he would have claimed that he'd done a fantastic, brilliant job. Never mind the people who died, I got the troops out. That's what I said I was going to do, that's what I did. I'm just fulfilling my promise to get the American troops out and end the war. And people would have died. Reporters, foreign nationals, people that were there distributing food and helping people to survive. They would all have been massacred by the fucking Taliban under Trump. I don't think what Biden's doing is a better job, much, but it's a little better. At least they're trying a little. But they're fighting against what Trump set up when he was in power. He set it up so it couldn't be reversed, at least not quickly. Goddamn fucking animal, so he is.
Sabotaging the visa process for these Afghan allies, which is why so many of them have been stuck all of this time. And you know, some of this has been hiding in plain sight. In 2019, a federal judge ruled that the Trump administration actually broke the law by radically dragging out the process of administering these visas and refusing to give answers to Afghans and even members of Congress who were inquiring on behalf of Afghans who had worked with U.S. troops and who had applied for these special visas.
Take note of the date there, September the 23rd, 2019. Trump was still in office for a whole fucking year and several months before he left office. But here, the judge is saying the Trump admin broke law with visa delays for Afghans, Iraqis, who worked for the US. So this is something that he'd been working on all through his presidency to make sure that it was going to be a fucking shit show. So don't fucking tell me that Trump's a great president. He's a fucking asshole and a fucking monster.
A federal judge ruled that they broke the law by breaking the system so that these visas would never get processed. It was hiding in plain sight that the system was broken under the Trump administration. But still, it is another thing altogether to have senior officials from inside that administration say, yeah, that process was broken. It was broken deliberately, in order to strand the Afghans who helped us. Joining us now is Olivia Troy, who served in the White House as a top advisor to Vice President Mike Pence.
Watching what's happening here and watching, President Biden work now very hard to rescue a lot of these people while we still can, I just think about the thousands of people that were in this pipeline for several years who should have been processed, who should have gone through this pipeline. And I'm talking about Afghans and I'm talking about Iraqis too, right? We saw the withdrawal from Syria where we know, and like my colleague Elizabeth Newman knows this, we think about this and we talk about it all the time. It's, many of these people did not make it out alive and they were our allies there. And so watching this has been incredibly angry and frustrating for me because for 4 years, this administration under Trump, they did nothing, and they decimated the process. Like they destroyed it, and it was very challenging for those of us working on these issues to really push the needle forward or get anything done. And look, I know Mike Pence knows this. He knows that this fell under my portfolio. He knows I followed up on it diligently. He would call me to check on some of the applicants' visas and find out what the process was. But it was a well-known thing that Stephen Miller allies were across the interagency. We had to meet with them. They were heads of offices. They were installed on purpose. Some of these loyalists eventually were installed in the NSC, where other public servants, career servants who were dedicated to trying to figure this process out were then removed from their roles and replaced with loyalists who only made this process harder.
What explains?
So, I don't know what to say anymore about the fucking fucktarded retardedness of Trump, Steve Miller, the sycophants that fucking congregated around this fucking asshole. But goddamn, man, if you can watch this video and think that Trump and Steve Miller and his sycophants did a good job, that the presidency under Trump was a good American presidency, then you're a fucking idiot. You don't know anything about how to run a fucking menage, you know what I mean? You evil motherfuckers, that's what they are. Evil. Monsters. Fucking monsters. Anyway, sign your fucking bar, and I'll see you some other time when I'm playing Fishing Planet or some fucking thing. Cheers, guys.